The observation advantages and disadvantages. So the advantages are able to video and annotate later, so you're able to record what's going on and then annotate observe what's actually happened later. It values all contributions, so it values everything about what goes on in the interview, not just what's said, but how it's said and stuff like that. You're also able to compare other people's results, so you're able to look at how one person acted and then another person acted in the same situation. You're also able to identify strengths and weaknesses in people, as you're able to look at everything in what they did and identify what they're good at and what they're not so good at. Disadvantages is you need training to be able to observe effectively. It can be seen as demoralising by the participant if they are being watched and observed in everything they do. You can also miss some key parts and actions if you aren't thorough with your research. You can miss key points of actions and how they answer the questions, something like that. You may need a lot of people. It makes it hard to watch everyone if you are having to observe a lot of people, so you may miss something. Moving on is questionnaire. This is a series of questions like a quiz that attacks a specific area of interest. So you actually set up the questions to look at a certain area. You use both open and closed questions. So quantitative data would be closed questions and qualitative data would be open questions. You're able to distribute it widely through email, post and handouts. You could hand out email with certain people you want to find information from, like college students, stuff like that. It can be done face-to-face where you're actually watching the person doing it, or privately where you send it off. The structure of it will depend on age, gender and ability, so it might change depending on what age group you're giving it to, or what gender as well. Advantages of questionnaire would be it's easy to distribute because you can distribute in so many ways. It's the same questions for everyone, so it's easy to compare results. It's easy to handle a handout and carry out, so it's easy to do because it's set questions and set answers. You're able to target specific wanted information as you are designing the questions yourself. Disadvantages are can't elaborate answers, so if someone doesn't understand an answer, if someone gives an answer that's interesting, you can't then expand on it, as you may not be in contact if it's done privately. It's also time consuming to get all the data out, collect it back in, and then send it off, and then analyse it yourself. You can't. The people you're doing it can't ask questions if they don't understand the question, which is bad, because then they might not be able to answer the question themselves. It may not be complete if it's sent as an email, because people might see it as junk mail. It may not be done, so you might not get rich amount of people doing it. If it's done in person, people may feel under pressure by being watched, so they might give an answer to appease you, as they feel under pressure to give you what you want. Next is experiment. Experiment is a test with a predetermined prediction of what will happen, which is the hypothesis. Then you go on to analysing and reading the data, as previously mentioned before. There are two types of experiment. These are field and laboratory experiments. It's important to note there are three criteria to make an experiment a true experiment. That is control. So this is control of extraneous variables, anything that will affect the experiment outside of it. The control of the groups, who's involved, matching the subject characteristics, so actually looking at the traits of the actual subject you're studying, and counterbalancing the actual experiment as well. The second thing is randomization. So randomization is the variety of methods you use during the experiment, and random assignment, which is when you randomly assign the subjects to certain tests and states. And the third one is manipulation. For it to be an actual experiment, you have to manipulate one point to find out a result. So this would be like influencing one variable, and requires extraneous variables to be controlled as well. So influencing one variable would be like changing a certain diet of someone to see if it helps them lose weight or something like that. In terms of gymnastic, it could be changing their training program to see if it makes them more flexible or not, whereas keeping someone on the same training program and then comparing the results and something along those lines. So a laboratory experiment is an experiment that takes place in a lab. This means that all conditions are controlled and it's very unnatural. So it's not really in a real life situation, but it is very specific and precise as everything's controlled and observed. Advantages of a laboratory experiment would be it's replicable. This is because you are able to repeat it as the conditions are so controlled. You're able to repeat these types of conditions. Extraneous variables are controlled as it's done in a lab, and everything's so specific that nothing will affect it outside. It also has high internal validity as once again it's done in a lab, so everything's controlled. You have precise technical equipment in a lab as well. That's good, and more likely casual effect as well is important to note. Disadvantages would be expensive technique and training, so it could be expensive to train and to actually use it in the lab. It's very unnatural, so it can't be generalizable and can't be used to compare it to real world. It loss of ecological validity as well, as it's done in a lab, and it could have evaluation apprehension as everything's so controlled you could or basically predict what's going to happen, which could affect the actual results you get. Next is a field experiment. This is experiments more in real settings. It uses less technical equipment but more real situations. It reflects more of what they are trying to find. So an advantage of this would be it's cheaper and more accessible. It supports ecological validity as it's in real life situation, and it mimics the sporting environment as it's not done in a lab, it's done in the actual environment of what sport they're doing, so on a football field with football. Disadvantage would be it'll be more time to do because you have to find a place, set it up, do it, and in terms of a real life situation, you probably get less advanced equipment as it's not in a lab, and it has lower internal validity as not everything's controlled in a field experiment. Next is experimental design. So there are 4 different types of experimental design. The first one is repeated measures. So this is when the same participants are used in each condition. So participants are used in both types of conditions. Crossover design is participants are exposed to more than one treatment, but secondary conditions could be affected by the first. So they use it's the same people doing the same thing twice, but however, if they've done it the first time, this could affect them in the second one as they've already done it and could predict what's going to happen or know what's going to happen. Independent groups is unrelated groups or different groups of participants are used in each condition, so it's just 2 separate types of groups doing 2 different types of things and not swapping over. And then the final one is matched pairs, so each group of participants is carefully matched on all variables considered relevant to the experiment, so they're actually put in a specific one depending on who their traits and characteristics. Experiment advantages and disadvantages. So an advantage would be careful and precise measurements as it's an experiment. You're able to test cause and effect as you have everything under control. You're also able to get quantitative numerical data, which is easy to read and analyse, and it's also objective as it's so controlled that results found can't be argued against. Disadvantage is control bias. If you have full control, you may be able to manipulate it to get the results you want. It's not always generalizable as it's such a controlled thing. It can't be generalized to real life and stuff like that. It could also have participant bias because they know that in a type of experiment they may change their actions and behaviours to appease the researcher. And also the final one is cost and availability. It could be expensive to run the lab and you might not have access to the lab as well.